There is this lesser-known scripture passage that I find deeply penetrates the spiritual experience of all of us in one way or another in our relationship with the Lord. In fact, it's so potent, I'm surprised it's actually not better known or more popular. And the passage I'm referring to comes from Ezekiel 16, and it's God's reflection on the origin story of his relationship with Israel. And what we find in Ezekiel 16 is that Israel is described by God as being born of very low estate. In fact, her beginnings are actually very ugly and raw. He says, your origin and your birth are of the land of the Canaanites. Now, in ancient history, the land of the Canaanites, before Israel moved in there as a nation, was one of paganism. So think demonic. This is like the opposite of the Garden of Eden. On the day you were born, your navel string was not cut, nor were you washed with water to cleanse you, nor rubbed with salt, nor swathed in bands. In other words, you were totally undignified. But above all, you were also unloved. No infant can cut its own navel cord. It requires the care of the people around it to clean it and to make sure that everything's okay. And the fact that this didn't happen to Israel means that no one loved you. And so God says, no eye pitied you. You were cast out on the open field. Now, the reason I think this describes everybody's spiritual experience in one way or another is because this is what we can expect from the world. When we look for love, when we look for justice, when we look for recourse from the world exclusively independent of God, we get hurt because the world is unjust. It is merciless. It promises a happiness that cannot deliver, and it results in only hurting people and creating psychological and spiritual and sometimes physical casualties in its wake. But then God says to Israel, when I passed by you and saw you weltering in your blood, I said to you in your blood, live. God is the first person who casts a merciful eye, the only one in this story who's really rooting for Israel. And I think that universal spiritual experience is recaptured seasonally in Advent. If you think about it, during the first week, we focused on the example of Rosa Parks, which helped us touch upon our own fatigue from living in the land of Canaan, from trying to find our peace in all of the wrong places, for competing in the fray and the constant king of the hill that the world can be. But then last week, we decisively turned our hearts away from the world and traveled the happy royal highway of confession back to God and into love's embrace. And in so doing, experienced the care and concern of a God who restores us to our dignity. And so now, in this third Sunday of Advent, Gaudete Sunday, we rejoice. And we heard through Zephaniah, shout for joy, O daughter Zion, sing joyfully, O Israel. Why? The Lord your God is in your midst. And then here comes the nuptial language. He will rejoice over you with gladness and renew you in his love. And that goes back to Ezekiel 16, where God, when he says he sees her, he then goes on to wait for her, support her, and then when she comes to full maidenhood, marry her to himself. That's the goal. That's the goal. And today we rejoice because that reality is being accomplished in our midst. But so often in the Christian narrative, this is where we stop and we're like, we made it. Bride of Christ. Awesome. But it's still Advent. So what do we do now? And this is where I think the crowd in the gospel gives voice to our need. They're in a similar situation at the waters of their baptism where God is washing them clean, where they're being reconciled to him. They then look at John and ask a very profound but simple question. What then shall we do? All this attention about becoming the bride. What does it mean to actually live as one? What does that look like? And John's answer is extremely insightful. I say this because this is the moment now, and I've experienced this myself, and as a priest, walking with other people, I can tell it's common. This is the moment where there can be this temptation of enormous pressure to do something extreme. Okay, now that I have been made totally new, I have to, and then insert extreme activity. Kind of like Zacchaeus. Remember in the tree, Jesus shows him a little bit of mercy, an ounce of mercy, and he says, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And then in doing so, when we try to mimic that behavior, we crumble under the pressure of our own self-imposed expectations and then find ourselves back in the land of Canaan. Now, certainly many saints have done incredible things along these lines, but that's not how John answers their question. What then shall we do? Listen to what he says. If you have an excess of food or clothing, share it. To the tax collectors, does he say, you better leave your job, you better become a missionary? No, he says, stop asking for more money than what is prescribed. To the soldiers, don't use your authority to extort people or falsely accuse them. In other words, he calls them to a basic exercise of justice and charity, and this is the important part, according to their state in life. He says to them, what you do now is you look at your circumstances as they are and consecrate them to God, so that how you engage what you're already involved in your state in life, is now done with the dignity that is appropriate to the bride. And so for us, on this third Sunday of Advent, as we're journeying along in our preparations for Christ, that's exactly what we should be doing. In our joy for what God has done, to ask him today, what does it mean for me in this job, in this family, in this block or street, to be the bride and to live the dignity that you have given me in your Son? So that hopefully others around you see that you are no longer like them, and that they too, exhausted in the fray, may look to you and ask, O daughter Zion, tell me, where have you found this joy?